52 countries, more than 2.2 billion people. A shared vision of the future, despite a colonial past. We'll find out what keeps the Commonwealth together long after the sun sets on the British Empire. I'm Shuli Ghosh. This is Insight. Hello and welcome to Insight. At its height, the British Empire covered nearly a quarter of the earth and made up of more than 20% of its population. Long after dozens of nations emerged from years of British rule, their ties remain voluntarily through the Commonwealth. It's a unique group of 52 countries, from the very big, like India, to a tiny island in the Pacific. But all have one thing in common. They could be the doorway to the trading deals their former colonial master needs as it faces Brexit. Insight's Juliana Oleinka reports.
As a group of 52 countries, the Commonwealth of Nations includes some of the world's richest and poorest, largest and smallest. This week, Britain's Queen Elizabeth was joined by other members of the royal family for an annual celebration that honours the diversity of the 2.5 billion people that make up the Union, formed in 1949.
Arriving at ancient Westminster Hall, the Queen came to open the 7th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference.
In this modern age, the strength and unity of the Commonwealth family does not lie in bonds forged by formal instruments, nor in common ancestry, nor in pursuing the same political line. It springs from the knowledge that we all share a lively concern for individual freedom and all the machinery which makes this possible.
The key strength of the Commonwealth was promoting the self-governance of former British colonies. Once India left, the sun began to set on the empire, but its former members sought a way to retain the benefits of their shared history. Throughout its near 70 years, as former territories have found their own iconic leaders, many have questioned whether a colonial past is really something to be celebrated. There are no legal ties between its members, no formal trading arrangements. Members with questionable human rights records sometimes get sanctioned, and those that do sometimes choose to leave.
The new Commonwealth was born as a constellation of independent countries joined together as a matter of will. And they represent about 2.4 billion people in the world. It's about 1/3 of the world's population. We've got Caribbean, Africa, ASEAN, Europe and North America all together. So what is wonderful is that it doesn't matter almost where elsewhere in the world you come from, you will see your echo in the faces, the cultures, the religions of the people in the Commonwealth.
This diversity is reflected here in Queen's Market, east of London. Amongst these communities, there are still mixed feelings about the benefits of the group for ordinary citizens. Now that Britain is heading for the EU exit, the UK could now seek a free trade deal between Commonwealth members to make up for the loss of its European trading network.
Like Britain, if we are not going to export to Europe, then we'll find somewhere to do our business.
I doubt it, because they can't even buy the bananas now from Dominica and all those countries. Everything is there. The banana's too small, the banana's this, the banana's that. So it's very, very difficult.
You can forget all about the political side of it. It's the positive side. Yeah, if they got something to sell, we got something to sell. That's it.
Last week, Commonwealth finance ministers held their first meeting in over a decade. Representatives of around 2/3 of member states turned up for the meeting in London. Trade between them is worth around $730 billion, 15% of worldwide trade flows. Britain is hoping that that could grow.
We had our relationship with Europe is changing. Yes, of course it's important. We will look for trade deals, we will look for common ground. There's enormous common ground, we know that. And we're already talking to people, let's be absolutely honest. We are talking to our Commonwealth partners and our neighbours, including Nigeria and many others, who we are very proud of being partners with.
Supporters of the Commonwealth claim to know each other more than most.
We have discovered that there's a Commonwealth advantage because we have similar language, similar structures, similar institutions, similar laws. It makes it so much easier for us to do business with one another. So we've identified that there's a 19% advantage for Commonwealth countries trading with each other. So we're looking at how we can take advantage of the intra-Commonwealth trade. And there's some really exciting things happening now.
These annual celebrations of a diverse culture, brought together under the Queen, may have a future that few predicted. Suddenly, the Commonwealth's founding, a most important member, has a selfish interest in deepening their ties. But all members have their own interests. And there are no guarantees that a new style of relationship will appeal to everyone. Juliana Olayinka, reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Sanjay Seth, who's a professor of politics at Goldsmiths University of London. And also with us is Inderjeet Parmar, who's a professor of international politics at City University of London. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. Welcome to the programme. Let's start by talking about the Commonwealth and what exactly it is, because there are no legal obligations between them. There's no formalised trading structure between them. So what is it that binds these countries? Is it just a question of history?
I think the history is a very important part of it. It's a conversion, effectively, of the British Empire into what was considered to be called a Commonwealth, which is supposed to be more equal. But actually, it was the act of an empire in decline, seeking, if you like, to compete with the Soviet Union and the United States after the Second World War, and you trying to use remnants of the empire as a kind of a bargaining chip between them.
But why do these Commonwealth nations want to stay together? What do they get out of this today?
It's a good question, because I think it's an open question of what they get out of it. I mean, although there's a lot of talking up of the Commonwealth in the prelude to Brexit and afterwards, I think the actual potential of it, economic and political, is severely limited. Politically, for the reason Inderjeet just gave, that is, this is the empire rebranded, and with some quite significant changes, but it hasn't escaped that history of empire. So politically there are limits, and economically, a lot of these countries maintain in recent times a connection with Britain because it provides access to the EU.
But I mean, economically, I suppose British politicians are looking at the Commonwealth and thinking, that's a pretty good market. It has, what, some 15% of the gross world product. I mean, that surely they're hoping to leverage that somehow.
Well, clearly, India being the largest economic power, rising economic power, there's going to be inevitable increases in trade and investment and the opening up of the market there and so on. But the Commonwealth, if you like, is a kind of a sort of mere geographical expression, as some people might say. It doesn't exist as an entity which has a kind of unified structure, which has a unified decision-making, and therefore rules which bind individual member states. It's a very, very loose union, and which is really one of the ways in which the UK tries to exert a little bit of influence across the world, but it actually... And
they have such different backgrounds. I mean, there's countries from the old British Empire, but you've got countries that were ruled by the French, by the Belgians. So, you know, you wonder what
you have two other members of the EU that are also members of the Commonwealth. So it's Inderjeet's absolutely right. It's almost not a thing. And the talking up of it, there will be increases in trade, but you know, there's a narrow self-satisfaction in the British or the Tory response to this, which is the idea that somehow something called Commonwealth will lead Indians or India to want to trade much more extensively. What it ignores is bilateral relations. Britain has in fact become even more restrictive in its immigration policies when it comes to South Asia. I mean, do they really think Theresa May got a sort of cool response when she went to India recently.
You wonder whether there's a certain irony in this, that there are these Commonwealth countries who were part of British rule, and now Britain is looking to them to take them out of a hole.
Well, it's clearly, they've never really seen those countries as other than benefits, if you like, economically, financially, politically, and so on, and also militarily. These are huge resources which Britain had, and they continue to be possible resources. But I think the key issue is that Britain is there trying to, if you like, bolster its public and its global role. The key issue there is that the Commonwealth is a hugely differentiated group of states.
It does have some
Canada,
similarities,
Australia,
though, doesn't it? I mean, when you look at these countries, there are common institutions, common systems, common languages. So there is a familiarity about these countries.
There's a shared history. We get back to the first point. But that shared history is not a happy history. I mean, later we'll be talking about what forged these unities. What forged it was naked coercion and exploitation. That's not a fabulous basis upon which to look. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, this is being talked up in England. Let's ask ourselves, when Britain exited the EU, or took the vote to do so, what was the reaction in the Commonwealth countries? Were they leaping up with joy, thinking, Britain will finally return home to where it belongs? Well, emphatically not. That was not the reaction. It was consternation.
It's not just Britain that has or is seeking to have influence here. I mean, you know, globally, we've got China, we've got Russia. They're all looking to exert their influences over these Commonwealth countries.
Absolutely. Yeah. The world is wide open, and there is a new geography of power, economic power, which is increasingly becoming diplomatic and political power. And I think in the post-Brexit position that Britain will find itself, I think we have to think about the Commonwealth not as one homogeneous mass, because within that Commonwealth there is the kind of so-called old Commonwealth, and that group has been strategically and economically and diplomatically far closer, and militarily as well. The Five Eyes program of intelligence sharing between Canada, Britain, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, has been going since the 1940s. That is to say, there's a hierarchy within the Commonwealth of power and of collaboration. And part of it is to do with the old bonds of racial union, Anglo-Saxonism and so on, which have got faint echoes even today, but were much more powerful 100 years ago and 50, 60 years ago as well.
And as you've both pointed out, you know, the whole era of being colonised by the British Empire was not without its disturbing aspects. So we're going to talk about that a bit later on. You're watching Insight, and coming up we'll be finding out why the end of the British Empire is still creating controversy. Stay with us.